Hey, what's up? Zach here, and today I've got the all-new Nike ZoomX Ultrafly Trail, and at a $260 starting price point, are these really worth it for, your particular needs? Let's find out. Now, starting off in the uppers, this is basically an entire bed of Nike Vaporwave, which is a mixture of TPU and TPE. You can basically think of it as ripstop, just a little bit stronger and just lets go of moisture a little bit easier. It's just quicker to dry. Now, on the upper durability test, 10 seconds highest grit sandpaper, I wanted to do this first because it was a lot stronger than ripstop to the burr. However, it still did rip through after 10 seconds. However, on just standard ripstop, usually the burr just rips straight through it right away. Now remember, even though they call ripstop, it's not meant to stop a rip, it's to stop the rip from getting bigger, right? So it's a super light material that at those little grids that you see under the microscope, that's usually where the rip will stop and be contained. Now Vaporwave is like that, but like I said, it just allows more moisture to let go of the shoe. So as their marketing goes, the shoe starts lighter and finishes lighter. However, if you look at the breathability test on that, they still heated up 116.1 degrees, then cooled down another 51.3 degrees. This is definitely not the best breathing shoe and definitely not the best shoe in terms of letting go of heat we've seen. Now with the heat gun on it, I could feel the heat blowing out of the entire upper bed. It's just that it just didn't have the really rapid, heat dissipation that some other, really minimalist shoes do. And I think you're kind of making a choice between, do you want a little bit stronger material? So not the most breathable shoe out there, but also a pretty nice combination of strength and lightness of the uppers, I guess you could say. The one thing I do love about the uppers, the Ultraflies though, is the integrated shoelace eyelet system borrowed over from the Nike Vapor 10. These do have a runner's knot. Anytime you see a runner's knot, it means you probably should be using it. The lockdown is quite a bit better with that. And because there is a pretty significant amount of padding in these for being more of like, a racer type shoe, there really wasn't a lot of cramping or anything like that or pinching on the laces. The laces are a little bit more flat, you can see here, so they're not really prone to hot spots. They kind of share that load over a larger surface area. So that was a little more comfortable than some of Nike's other ZoomX products. And moving into the midsole teardown, I do want to just point out one thing to you before I show you what's actually underneath of it. See the giant fly plate logo on there? To me, when I first took them out of the box, I thought that fly plate was going to act a lot like, the Alpha Flies and the Vapor Flies. However, when you tear it open, you can see that fly plate is really abbreviated, basically just center of the arch to the beginning of the forefoot. The rest of it just an entire bed of ZoomX foam. Now, that ZoomX foam feels a lot similar to the Alpha Flies and the Vapor Flies. There's just not as much of it under there, so you don't feel as much of a pogo sticking effect. The shoe is also built on a wider last, especially in the forefoot, which we'll talk about in the fit and runnability section. But suffice it to say, I was expecting a little bit more stability from that fly plate versus what I actually got when I put them on more uneven trails. Now, one thing I'm noticing is hard rocks like these, almost like if you're on a mountain bike trail, the ZoomX still does want to buck a little bit. I did get into a little bit of like an over eversion situation, kind of pinch the outside of my subtalar joint on these. So really like soft trail, shale, dirt, that stuff's all fine. It's when you go from the really soft stuff to the real kind of rocky things, not so much. So if it's more like a regular rock, like all rocks think you're okay, or all dirt, it's okay. When you start mixing them like we are here in like a Midwestern trail or a Northeastern trail, that's I think where either you need a stiff orthotic or just avoid them. And of course, we'll get into more of the characteristics of this midsole foam, just the overall build of the shoe in the runnability section. But if you look at this midsole setup on the bounce height test first, got 34 centimeters in the heel and then 38 centimeters here in the forefoot. The sound that this shoe made on the bounce height test was much more of a dull, like hollow thud than some of the other Zoom products that we've seen. This shoe just definitely does not have the launch that the Vapor Flies have, that the Alpha Flies have. A lot of it has to do with the shank on them being abbreviated, but also I just think just kind of the setup of the ZoomX just lends these more to, more of a trail shoe versus more of a super shoe. And looking at the outsole tread, this is Vibram rubber, and Vibram really did throw the kitchen sink at this shoe. There are a lot of words on the outsole tread. So number one, the lugs they use, which is the main tread bodies, those little delta patterns here. As you can see on the distal end of the heel lugs and the proximal end of the forefoot and midfoot lugs, you see these little dimples in them. That is for extra grip, and those are placed strategically where you're gonna come down first in kind of your strike phase of gait, and then in your push-off phase of gait too. They almost act like little squeegees for uneven type things on the ground, right? Like, you know, a wet rock or uneven type trail surfaces. The next thing it is they call this their light base. Basically what just that means is they've taken out a lot of rubber, right? So it's just a really thin piece of rubber, but they said they've like put additives, and just the compound of rubber is a lot more durable. The durometer only comes in at 13.75 on my durometer. However, on the Outsole durability test, 10-second highest grit sandpaper, I mean, not even a millimeter of damage. So for, you know, a durometer that's not super high, the compound of rubber definitely does resist wear, so that isn't just marketing jargon. That is a pretty darn good resistance to abrasion. The other thing I noticed they had is it's called like the Mega Grip, and that is like, once again, the type and style of rubber they have. And if you look at the speed ratio of this package, it comes in at a 3.13, which is pretty darn fast for a shoe that has a little bit more of an anatomic shaped toe box, a little bit of a wider lasted forefoot. We'll get into the rest of the fit in the fit section, but suffice to say, even for a road running shoe, like if you want a road running shoe with a little bit more of a, you know, anatomic toe box, but with a little bit more of the trappings of a super shoe, this is still can compete with some of the more fast road running shoes. Now, to me, the most pleasantly surprising part of the Ultraflies was their fit. A little bit more hugging in the midfoot, a little more anatomic in the forefoot, a little bit of a wider lasted base in that forefoot. And you really need that on a trail because you need to have a little more tactile sensation, right? You know, for a road running shoe, you want that forefoot to be a little bit more streamlined. You want to be able to have a quicker and easier, more fluid, efficient push off. That's why a lot of running shoes are made that way. They're not made that way for any sort of conspiracy to give you bunions or Taylor's bunions or any of that stuff. That's why you see a lot of those road running shoes like that versus a lot of trail shoes where they are a little more anatomic, allow your toes to kind of feel the ground a little bit better, allow you to get a little more of that tactile sensation. It's just different running patterns. There isn't a one best for everybody. There's sometimes where you want the more anatomic toe box. There's sometimes where, you know, the more fluid and just more efficient toe box is better. And on this, I'm kind of glad they went with the more anatomic toe box. Now, that does give a lot of options for fit, narrow, medium, wide foot, and just go true to size on these. I think a 4E probably could just go up a half size, especially because of the runner's knot. Now, in terms of the snake bitten foot, remember, ZoomX foam, super forgiving. Even though it's not the most shock absorbing thing out there, it's still pretty darn good. That fly plate is right where you would need it still for some decent arch support. I would say for a shoe that is more of like a ripstop type material and a little more of a minimal upper type shoe, these are some of the better ones to throw an orthotic in or just on their own for arch support, especially because of the real hugging midfoot on this shoe. So I would say with a low profile orthotic, you definitely don't want something super bulky in here, but a low profile orthotic, I think these are one of the better trail shoes out there for, you know, just protecting some of those little bumps and bruises on your foot. That being said, for someone who is an ankle sprainer, you're gonna want something probably with a little bit more of a stout base underneath you, which, like I said, we'll talk about in the runability section, kind of already talked about in the midsole teardown. And last but not least, getting in the performance or runability of the Ultrafly Trail, I will say for a midfoot striker, these are really comfortable. These things, you know, if you land midfoot, they will give you a lot back in return. Number one, in terms of pop, but also just forgiveness, ease. They're just a really nice fluid midfoot striking shoe. Midfoot to kind of distal midfoot. Heel strikers, I think, are also okay for this. Forefoot strikers are good, but just because of kind of the drop from the arch, the distal arch into the forefoot, and for kind of what they are, they're fine for a forefoot striker, but I think better for that distal midfoot to midfoot striker. So I think, you know, pretty much the gambit is fine. Remember, these are meant for trail running, so a more midfoot striking gait is going to be a little bit more stable on those trails anyway. I've found that if I was on a really nice groomed trail, dirt trail, shale, anything that was regular, these things could pick up speed and pick up speed in a hurry. They were super fluid, efficient. My legs felt super fresh from start to finish. I didn't get really any of those like really bogged down, tired feeling feelings in my legs, like a lot of times I do, because I'm a little bit more of like, you know, the stocky, you know, meteor type runner, obviously. So I'm gonna, you know, kind of feel a little bit more of those inefficiency type drags on my legs. Whereas on these, that ZoomX foam, the fly plate is really nice. The uppers on these, yeah, they are super light, but they're strong enough to hold everything in the midsole together. So really everything about this shoe is meant for ultra efficiency. So I think if you're someone that has a little bit of a better trail running pedigree than I do, someone that like barefoot runs a lot, right? I'm talking legitimate barefoot runs a lot, that you can avoid all like little glass shards and rocks on the road, and you have really that good proprioception. I think these are fine for more of the uneven type trails. If you're just like a hobbyist trail runner, just weekend warrior, just someone like me who just does it because you like to be on the trails, or you just don't feel like mountain biking that day, then you're gonna want something with maybe a little bit of a stronger shank, stronger midsole foam underfoot, something more along, you know, a basketball or tennis shoe type foam, which a lot of, you know, trail running shoes are made of, versus the ZoomX, you know, in the road running category, where it's fine when everything's even, but once it starts getting uneven, it's not that great. I think if you are elite, these are going to perform elite for you. So I think the better you are at trail running, the more they're worth that price point. Like I said, if you're like me, you know, you're better off with something a little more stable that you can kind of trust underfoot a little bit better. And like I said, if you're somebody maybe like, you know, like Drew from Wear Testers, who's a lot more, you know, accomplished runner, then I think you're going to like these a little bit more. So I think it just, that's kind of the sliding scale of these. So, you know, I'd love to hear your thoughts, you know, on the Ultrafly Trail, especially because I think there's a lot of different types of runners in this community. So I'd kind of love to hear, you know, what your thoughts are, if there's something that you gel with or something not. They do make a fine road running shoe too, if you're looking for something more an anatomic toe box, but also with a little bit more of that kind of elite performance. I think these kind of do satisfy that. So like I said, love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you want to see the cousin to the Nike Ultrafly Trail, the Nike Vaporfly Next Percent 3 go under the knife, make sure you click into this video up above and subscribe down below. Respect your rubber and foam, and I'll see you somewhere in the Sneakerverse.